Hey guys, tonight we're heading into the desert. Well, sort of. Imagine yourself standing under a sky so blue it looks fake, in a landscape so hot your sandals start to soften. You're in ancient Persia, and there's not a fan, not a fridge, not even an ice cube inside. The sun is blazing, the wind is more like a hairdryer than a breeze, and somehow people are still living here, smiling, drinking tea, and wearing layers. You start to wonder, have they just gone mad? Or do they know something you don't? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where are you watching from, and what time is it right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself squinting beneath a brutal desert sun. Everything is tense and stone. Even the goats look a little beige. You're somewhere between the dusty folds of modern-day Iran. But tonight, your time machine runs on curiosity. No wires, no sci-fi sound effects, just imagination, and a really strong need to cool down. Around you, a village clings to the land like it's learned not to argue with the heat. Mud brick houses with domed roofs, narrow winding alleys, and walls so thick you could probably sleep inside them. And you might want to, because the minute you step inside one of these homes, a strange thing happens. It's cool, like, actually cool. You pause at the threshold, suspicious. Is there sorcery involved? Maybe some secret stash of ice hidden beneath the floor. You expect a ceiling fan, or at least a very enthusiastic servant with a palm leaf. But there's nothing, just adobe walls, a few cushions, and a cat that looks like it's judging you. A man in a linen tunic waves you in. He smiles. First time in the desert. You not still processing the fact that this man is sipping hot tea in what feels like a living room refrigerator. How is it cooler inside? You ask, cautiously. He laughs. You want to know how we fight the sun? You nod again, because yes, absolutely yes. He leans forward like he's about to share a family recipe. You don't fight the sun, he says. You let the wind do the work. Wind, in this heat. You're skeptical, but he gestures for you to follow. Together, you step back out into the blinding light, walk through the alleyways, and arrive at something odd. It's like a giant chimney rising out of the house like a misplaced tower. That, he says, is the first part of the trick. But before I explain that, you need to understand what's under your feet. You glance down at the dry, cracked ground. It doesn't look promising, just dust and rock and the occasional footprint from what might have been a very large lizard. But your host is already moving, leading you toward the edge of the village. There, the earth dips slightly, revealing a narrow shaft with smooth stones circling its rim. You feel a faint rush of air, cool air brushing against your ankles. It's like the ground itself just sighed. Welcome to the beginning, he says, of the world's first air conditioner. And just like that, you realize this isn't just a village. It's an entire cooling system carved into the land. A 2,500-year-old science experiment that works so well, people are still using it, and tonight, you're going to walk right into it. You're still standing there, blinking at the breath of cool air rising from the hole in the ground. In a desert like this, even a lukewarm breeze feels like a miracle. But this is something else. It's crisp, it's calm, it smells like earth and stone and a faint whisper of water. You kneel down, holding your hand above the opening, and sure enough, it's like the planet is exhaling. Your host grins. It's not magic, it's engineering. You raise an eyebrow. He gestures to the shaft. That's the top of a Kannada tunnel. We Persians built thousands of them centuries ago. Long, sloping, underground canals. But they do more than just carry water. You peer down again, this time with a little more respect. The entrance is narrow, but the air tells you there's a whole world below your feet. You've heard of aqueducts. Of course, but these are different. The Kannada system doesn't move water by force. No pumps, no buckets, just gravity. Simple, elegant, and somehow still working. The ancient Persians weren't just good at building empires, they were good at cooperating with nature. And Kannats are one of their quietest masterpieces. The idea is genius in its simplicity. High up in the mountains, far from the blistering heat, The water table is much closer to the surface. Dig a horizontal tunnel from up there, angle it downward just enough, and the water flows by itself. You dig vertical shafts every so often along the way, both to remove soil during construction and to allow ventilation and, as it turns out, to let that cool air rise. You're not the only one impressed. Historians still argue over where connaughts first originated: Persia, Mesopotamia, or maybe even further east, but most agree that ancient Iran perfected the system. Some of these tunnels stretch for tens of kilometers, and incredibly, some are still in use today. You asked your guide how people even built them without maps, without drones, without, well, any of the fancy stuff. He smiles again, very carefully and very slowly. Some teams took decades to finish one connaught. They'd listen to the earth, watch the stars, feel the slopes with their feet. He shrugs. Sometimes they guessed wrong, and then they'd start again. You try to imagine it. Hunch figures in the dawn light, chiseling their way beneath a mountain, inch by inch. No air conditioning, no GPS, just patience and a desperate need to not boil alive in summer. As you follow the path of the connaught through the village, you notice how the homes seem arranged to catch the breeze. The vents in the ground, spaced evenly like quiet little chimneys, guide the cool underground air up into courtyards and living spaces. It's like the entire village is breathing. You crouch near another shaft and feel it again. That strange, cooling breath of the desert itself. No electricity, no noise, just silence and wind. And here's the fun part: some connaughts weren't just for homes. They cooled food storage rooms, public meeting halls, and even small shrines. Legend has it, one royal complex even had a connaught that fed into a fountain with floating rose petals like an ancient, fragrant swamp cooler. People think we were primitive, your guide says, but when it comes to surviving summer, I think we were pretty clever. He's not wrong, and you can't help but smile at the thought that thousands of years ago, someone might have stood right where you are, feeling the same wind, grateful for the same brilliant idea. The sun begins to lower, casting golden light across the mud brick walls. You take a deep breath, feeling the desert warm around you, but no longer oppressive, not with this cool current gently trailing at your ankles. You're starting to see the truth. Air conditioning didn't begin with electricity. It began with understanding, with earth, water, and a little bit of wind, the kind that carries stories with it. You wake up early the next morning, if you can call it waking up when you barely slept, because a local kid decided your chest was its new throne. The desert dawn is cooler, quieter, with a kind of blue stillness that makes even your thoughts feel hushed. You step outside, stretching, and find your guide waiting for you with a crooked smile and pieces of flatbread. We're visiting the builders today, he says. Architects. You not. He chuckles. Sort of. You follow him through the winding alleys, the morning light stretching long shadows across the adobe walls. Eventually, you reach a courtyard where men and women are huddled over scrolls, models, and bricks. It's not what you expect from an ancient construction site. There's a calm, almost meditative rhythm to their work. No shouting, no rushing, just soft conversations, dusty fingers, and the occasional hat scratch. These are the Badger people, your guide says. The wind catchers. Yes, wind catchers. You'd seen the tall chimney-like structures yesterday, but hadn't realized just how complex they really are. You thought maybe they were just decorated towers or oversized chimneys, but no, these are early climate control devices, built with an understanding of thermodynamics that would make your high school science teacher shed a single proud tear. You approach one of the models. It's a cross-section of a tall, hollow tower with open vents at the top. Beneath it is a small room, shaded and half-sunken. One of the architects, an older woman with clever eyes, notices your curiosity and waves you over. Here, she says, pointing. Wind enters from this direction. It's forced down the shaft, where it cools before entering the living space. You blink. It's like a reverse chimney. She grins. Exactly, but it's smarter than that. When the air outside is hotter than inside, the tower reverses, blowing warm air out instead. It adjusts naturally, like lungs. Your son nodded because of the science. You vaguely remember something like this from a YouTube video once saved you because they figured this out so long ago. Using only observation and patience. And mud, lots of mud. Some towers, she adds, even had water at the bottom so the air would cool by evaporation as it passed over the surface. She shrugs like it's no big deal. We just listen to the wind. That's when it hits you. These people aren't fighting the desert. They're working with it. Every design choice has a purpose. Tall towers to grab the highest, coolest air. Courtyards placed just so to catch shadows at the right time. Even the colors of the wall spell, reflective, designed to bounce back the heat instead of absorb it. You suddenly feel like your overpriced modern apartment was built by amateurs with a Pinterest account. You wander into a near-complete home where a wind catcher is already doing its thing. It's dead quiet inside. No hum, no rattle, no sound of spinning blades. Just air cool and moving, like a mountain breeze trapped inside a room. It's so peaceful. It's a little eerie. You sit down on a cushion and close your eyes. For a moment, you forget the heat outside, the dust, the sun. It's just you and the wind. Outside, your guide calls to you. You hungry? You are, but part of you doesn't want to move. This room feels like a secret, like you just unlocked an ancient cheat code for survival, but your stomach growls, and history can't wait when there's bread involved. As you step back into the growing heat, you glance back at the tower rising above the roof, a silent sentinel, catching the breeze, directing it gently downward. It doesn't buzz, it doesn't break, it doesn't need a manual, it just works. Historians still debate who exactly invented the wind catcher. Some say it originated in ancient Egypt. Others argue from Mesopotamia or even early Pakistan. But nowhere did it flourish quite like Persia. In Yazdalonian Iranian cities surrounded by desert, hundreds of these towers still stand today. Centuries later, doing exactly what they were built to do. You smile. You're starting to see a pattern here. The more you look at ancient Persia, the more you realize this place wasn't just surviving the heat. It was mastering it. You're beginning to realize something kind of wild. Every time you think you've seen the full trick, Persia pulls out another. Just when you wrap your head around comets and wind catchers, your guide points to the horizon and says, "Now we go to the city of wind." You laugh, because that sounds like a Tolkien novel, but he's completely serious. So, with a water pouch slung over your shoulder and sandals already collecting dust like magnets, you set off toward Yazd. If comets are the veins and wind catchers the lungs, then Yazd is the brain that put it all together. And when you arrive, you instantly get it. The place looks like someone built a city specifically for the desert and made sure it was quiet enough to nap in. The skyline is nothing like your typical skyline. No glass towers, no cranes, just a forest of wind catchers rising over domed roofs, each one catching invisible currents and funneling them down into homes, temples, workshops. You squint at one and think, it almost looks like a periscope, only instead of spying on submarines, it's scouting for fresh air. Walking through the narrow alleys of Yazd, the temperature drops at least 5 degrees. Not metaphorically, you feel it. The streets are deliberately curved, angled, and shaded to avoid the sun, like the entire city is playing hide and seek with the heat. It's brilliant and quiet, almost reverent. No traffic, no buzzing machines, just the soft pad of sandals, distant chatter, and the occasional pigeon flapping somewhere overhead. Your guide leads you to a small home with a garden in the center, a square of green in a world of beige. Inside, it's as calm as a library, and just as cool. You sit beneath the opening of one wind catcher and feel the breeze snake past your shoulders. It doesn't gust, it glides. This one's been working since my grandfather's grandfather was a child, the homeowner says, placing a bowl of chilled pomegranate seeds in front of you like it's nothing. You stare at it, stunned, without any repairs. He shrugs. Well, some maintenance, a few bricks, a bit of love. Fair enough. He goes on to explain how some of the taller wind catchers, especially the ones over public bathhouses, were designed with multiple directional openings. No matter where the wind came from, one of the vents would catch it. The hot air, meanwhile, would rise and exit through the opposite side, creating a self-perpetuating airflow loop. You raise an eyebrow. That sounds deliberate. Oh, it is. He grins. It's geometry, physics, and a little poetry. He's not wrong, and you're not the only one who's impressed. Even modern engineers have studied his layout, trying to figure out how a pre-electric city can stay so comfortable with nothing but stone, water, and wind. And while some of the answers are clear, like orientation, elevation, and thermal mass, others still leave room for debate. Historians argue about who brought the first twin tower to Est. Your guide tells you later, but most agree no one did it quite like us. You wander up to a rooftop near sunset, the sky painted in burnt orange and soft gold. The windcatchers stand tall around you, unmoving but full of purpose, like desert monks meditating through the ages. The breeze brushes your face, cool, gentle, familiar now, and you smile, because this isn't just history, it's working history. You close your eyes, and for a moment, you try to imagine the city as it was hundreds of years ago. Honestly, it probably looked exactly the same. And maybe, just maybe, it felt the same too. By now, you've accepted that the ancient Persians weren't just desert survivors, they were low-key environmental engineers. And yet, just when you think the architectural surprises are over, someone mentions evaporative cooling chambers. You blink. Come again. Your guide laughs. You see, he leads you to what looks like a modest room, tucked into the side of a much larger structure. It's half buried into the ground, the entrance shaded by a small overhang. Inside, it's dim. The air is thick but surprisingly fresh, and there's a quiet dripping sound coming from somewhere in the corner. At first glance, it seems like nothing special, just an empty room with stone walls and a small pool of water. But then you feel it, a breeze, not from above, not from outside, but across the water. And it's chilly, almost unnaturally so. This isn't a mistake. You've just stepped into an early version of an evaporative cooling system, essentially a primitive, passive air conditioner. No humming fans, no humming anything, just water, air, and an understanding of physics that feels way too modern for people in robes and sandals. Here's how it works. Warm air from the outside is drawn into one of those trusty wind catchers. Before it enters the room, it's directed across a shallow pool or through porous clay jars filled with water. As that air passes over or through, it picks up moisture and cools down. By the time it reaches you, it's dropped several degrees and it feels it. You reach out toward the jar sitting near the entrance. The clay is cool to the touch, almost as if it's been refrigerated. Your guide sees your surprise and nods. Porous material. He explains. The water slowly seeps through the jar and evaporates on the surface. That evaporation cools the pot and the air around it. It sounds simple, but it's deeply clever. And like everything else here, it was scalable. Small homes might have a few of these clay pots, placed strategically near air vents. Larger structures, like palaces or religious schools, would build full evaporation rooms to temples to thermodynamics. You sit cross-legged on the floor and close your eyes. The trickling water, the soft breeze, the faint scent of wet earth, it's almost meditative. If you squint, you could be inside a spa, minus the overpriced bathrobe. One of the architects joins you and starts talking about the materials used. Some people think you need advanced tools to build something smart, she says, running her hand along the stone. But we had mud and wind and a lot of time to watch what worked and what didn't. You ask how widespread this technique was, and she shrugs. Depends on the region. Some desert towns used it, some didn't. But here, she gestures around, here, it became an art. Historians today still can't agree on who first harnessed evaporative cooling in architecture. Was it the Mesopotamians, the Persians? Ancient Egyptians had jars like this too. And there's always the possibility that people figured it out separately in different places, because, let's face it, nobody likes sweating through their dinner. The fact that this technique still works thousands of years later, without so much as a power cord, is both inspiring and, well, kind of humbling, especially when you think about how often modern cooling systems break down. If you so much as look at them wrong. As you stand to leave, you pause for a moment. You run your fingers along the jar again. Still cool, still working, still whispering the same message across the centuries. Pay attention to the world around you. It knows how to help. You think you've seen it all by now. Underground canals. Check. Wing towers. Check. Clay jars that double as magical chillers. Double check. But then someone casually mentions the word yakshal. You stop. Yak. What now? Yakshal. Your guide repeats, grinning. Ice pit. Ice. In Persia. He just nods. Oh yes. Even in summer. You blink. This. You have to see. He leads you to the outskirts of town, where the horizon opens up to flat, sun-baked earth. In the distance, rising like a giant beige Hershey's kiss out of the ground, is what looks like an enormous mud dome from afar. It's oddly smooth and elegant. Up close, it's massive. Its surface is textured with ridges, and a narrow entryway opens like a cave mouth at its base. Step inside, your guide says, and you duck carefully, because the floor slopes down into cool darkness. Your sandals click softly on stone, and instantly the air shifts. It's colder. You rub your arms without meaning to. This is the yakshal, an ancient Persian refrigerator, a marvel of pre-electric engineering designed to do one miraculous thing: make and store ice. No tricks, no freezers, no magic, just design. You reach the bottom and stare around in awe. The interior is cavernous, the thick adobe walls some over 2 meters. Thick air made from a special material called sarouche, a mix of clay, egg whites, lime, sand, and goat hair. It's waterproof, windproof, heat-resistant, and apparently as friendly. Wait, you say slowly, turning to your guide. They made ice here. He nods, grinning. Right here, even in the middle of summer. And then he explains the method. During the cold desert winters, water was channeled from continents into shallow, shaded pools near the yakshal. At night, the temperatures dropped low enough for the water to freeze. Once frozen, workers would break up the ice and haul it into the pit, stacking it layer by layer with insulation, usually straw or ash, in between. The dome structure, with its insulating walls and strategic airflow channels, kept the temperature low enough that ice could last well into the blistering summer. You're stunned. You're trying to decide what's more impressive: the fact that they made ice without electricity, or the fact that they stored it for months. And Yish historians still debate whether the yakshal was purely for storage, or if some clever engineering actually allowed for more active freezing. Some suggest the airflow and insulation could create a natural cooling microclimate. Others aren't so sure. Either way, you're inside a 2,000-year-old fridge, and it's working. And it wasn't just for ice. Yakshals were also used to store perishable food, rosewater, and even medicines. Some noble households even used them for a little summer indulgence: cold drinks. Because apparently, once you've conquered the desert, the next step is inventing smoothies. You climb slowly back toward the entrance, feeling the temperature rise with each step. When you finally step back into the sunlight, it feels almost rude. You squint up at the dome and realize it's not just functional, it's elegant, beautiful, even a sculpture with a purpose. And once again, the message is clear: the Persians didn't build against nature. They built with it. They saw the dry air, the wide temperature swings, the cold desert nights, and they got creative. You take one last look at the dome as you leave. It stands quiet, solid, unbothered by centuries or heat waves, a frowning secret in the middle of the sunniest place on earth. And you think, yeah, if these people had built your apartment complex, you probably wouldn't be arguing with your thermostat every July. You're back in the city now, legs a little dusty, mind still trying to recover from the idea of ice in a desert. But before you can get to comfortable, your guide's already waving you toward another building. This one is grand arches, mosaics, and courtyards. You half expect someone to announce your arrival with a trumpet fanfare. Instead, you get a bowl of rosewater and a nod from a sleepy-looking servant. Welcome to the Summer Palace, your guide says, stepping onto the cool stone floor with a little too much enthusiasm. Here, you learn how royalty stayed chill. Literally, the moment you cross the threshold, you feel it, a sharp drop in temperature, like walking into a cave. You pause. Your brain says, stone, heat, must be sweltering. But your skin says, shut up, this is wonderful. The palace layout is unlike anything you've seen. Open courtyards alternate with shaded arcades. Rooms are arranged not just for style, but airflow. High ceilings, Thick walls, cross ventilation, all the classics. Executed perfectly, but there's something else here, something you hadn't noticed before. Do you hear that? Your guide whispers. You stop. Yes, a faint sound, soft, constant, trickling. You follow the sound through a hallway and find yourself in a long corridor lined with small channels, cut directly into the floor. Water, clear and cold, flows gently through them, guided by gravity and conic fed supply. It doesn't splash, it doesn't gush, it whispers. Cooling system, your guide says, crouching down to run his hand through the stream. It pulls heat from the air, makes the floor pleasant, adds moisture to the space. Of course it does. You keep walking and enter what looks like a private chamber. High above, a wind catcher funnels air downward, where it flows across one of these tiny water channels. The result, a room that feels several degrees cooler than the hall outside. It's subtle, natural, effortless. You sit down on a woven mat and feel a breeze kiss your cheeks. You start wondering why you ever paid for AC in the first place. And apparently, it wasn't just for comfort. Historical records suggest that in places like Persepolis and Shiraz, these water-cooled rooms were used for everything from midday naps to diplomatic meetings. Because let's face it, nobody makes smart political decisions when they're sweating through their robes. Your guide pulls aside a curtain, revealing another space that's one smaller, enclosed, and with one key difference. The floor is sunken. This is a house connect. He says, a cooling chamber. Water ran through the base. Air from the wind tower above circled down. It was like stepping into a jar of clay and ice. You climb down the steps and sit on the cool bench carved into the wall. It's dim, quiet, and surprisingly cozy. People lived like this. You asked. He smiles. If you had money, yes. If not, you'd still get a version of it just scaled down. You rest your head against the wall and feel the smoothness of centuries-old plaster. You start to think about how every detail of this palace was designed not just for show, but for survival. The colors reflect light, the water absorbs heat, the geometry channels air. It's all interconnected, like a giant passive cooling organism. Even the trees in the garden outside aren't just there to look pretty. They're strategically placed for shade, scent, and temperature regulation. You catch a whiff of jasmine on the breeze and think, okay, this is getting suspiciously luxurious. And Yish historians still debate exactly how much these systems could cool a space. Some argue that in ideal conditions, they could drop interior temperatures by 10 degrees Celsius or more. Others are more conservative, but everyone agrees they worked. As the evening sets in, golden light filters through the mashrabia screens on the windows, casting patterned shadows across the floor. You feel the temperature shift again, this time not from architecture, but from nature witting down. It's peaceful, the kind of peaceful that makes you forget what year it is. You stand slowly, reluctant to leave. One last breath of the cool air, one last glance at the perfect breeze sliding across water like silk, and then you think, if this is how royalty stayed chill, maybe they were onto something bigger than luxury. Maybe they were designing balance. Night has fallen now, but the city doesn't sleep. Not really. It just softens. The desert heat has finally let go of your skin, and there's a hush over everything, like someone turned the world's volume down to a low hum. You follow your guide through lamplit alleys, your sandals scuffing softly on the stone. Tonight's destination, a humble home. No palace grandeur, no ice domes or royal fountains, just a modest courtyard house tucked between two taller walls. And yet, as you step inside, the air feels like someone left a window open to the mountains. Cool, quiet, effortlessly serene. This, your guide says, is how regular people lived and stayed cool. You sit on a cushion under a fig tree in the center courtyard, listening to the gentle splash of a tiny pool nearby. It's called a house, and while it might look decorated, it's doing important work. It reflects moonlight, draws your eyes away from the dusty corners, and most importantly, it helps cool the air, just like the grand palaces you saw earlier. Only, Count Sire, your host appears a woman in her 50s with a warm smile and a tray of ice-sour cherry drinks. Iced, your brain pauses. Where did the ice come from? You whisper. She laughs. We still have a yetchel in the village. We just don't brag about it. Touche. As you sip, She explains how homes like hers were carefully oriented north-south alignment, narrow windows placed high for light and ventilation, thick walls made of mud brick to absorb the sun's heat during the day and release it slowly at night. Some rooms even had double ceilings or small basements or dabs where people could nap during the hottest hours. And you suddenly realize that these folks weren't passive victims of the desert. They were designers, tinkerers, always adapting. The house may be simple, but every curve, crack, and corner has a purpose. You follow your host into one of the back rooms, half underground. The air drops a few degrees again. The walls are cool to the touch. In the corner, a small window faces the courtyard pool, pulling air across the surface and into the room. You stand quietly, amazed. This room is a thermal time capsule. She gestures toward a short wooden stool by a woven mat. This was my grandfather's favorite nap spot. Even in July, you sit, trying it for yourself. Yep, you can nap here. You want to nap here. But she's not done. In a whisper, she tells you how. During especially hot nights, families would sleep on the rooftops. They carry blankets, pillows, sometimes even snacks, and lie under the stars while the wind catchers hunt softly above. If you listen close, she says, you can hear the air moving, like it's telling stories. You head up the narrow stairs to the rooftop, and sure enough, the breeze is very gentle and steady. The stars above are so bright, it's like someone polished the sky. And all around you, you can see other rooftops with bedding already laid out. Neighbors chatting quietly, kids pointing at constellations, cats curled up in sleeping corners. Sleeping outside was our version of central air, your guide says, appearing beside you. It's funny, you came looking for ancient technology. You found nighttime comets, in domes, in wind catchers. But here, beneath a sky full of stars and the scent of figs and dust, you realize something deeper. The greatest cooling system of all might be community, simplicity, awareness of the world around you. Historians might argue over the invention dates and the mechanics, but this rooftop breeze, this starlit silence, it feels timeless. You lie back on the mat, staring up at the sky, and wonder how many generations did exactly the same. The next morning arrives not with alarm clocks, but with that slow, golden creep of sunlight across the rooftop. Birds chirp somewhere. A kettle whistles. You stretch and sit up, realizing that for the first time in forever, you actually slept well in a hot climate. No AC, no noisy fan, just a breeze, some smart architecture, and the occasional cat walking over your feet at 3 a.m. Your host greets you downstairs with a smile and a plate of warm bread, cheese, and herbs. Today, she says, handing you a cup of mint tea, you learn how we build all this. You blink, me. She laughs. Well, not literally, but you'll meet the people who did. And just like that, you're off again, this time to the fringes of the city, where the sun hangs heavy and the smell of clay is thick in the air. You arrive at a construction yard. No cranes, no machinists, just piles of bricks, buckets of plaster, and a crew of dusty artisans in long tunics laughing over a breakfast spread. One of them sees you, waves you over, and hands you a trowel. Want to try building a wind tower? You freeze. Is this a test? They all laugh. No, but it's harder than it looks. Turns out, ancient Persian cooling systems weren't just genius to your hands-on. Each mud brick was made with care, sun-dried for weeks. The precise angles of a wind catcher had to be calculated by eye, by hand, by feel. There were no blueprints, just knowledge passed from master to apprentice like old family stories. One bricklayer walks you around a partially built tower and shows you how the vents are shaped to scoop up the prevailing lines. He explains that different cities use different shapes. His prefers four-sided towers, while other regions experimented with 8 sides, curved inlets, or even spirals. No one system fits all. He says, wiping sweat from his brow. We built for here, for this land, this sun, this wind. You ask if anything ever went wrong. He grins all the time. Some towers whistled, some sucked in hot air instead of cool, others collapsed in a good windstorm. That's how we learn it. You not trying to picture the trial and error centuries of it. Teams standing on rooftops with their heads tilted, listening for airflow like musicians tuning an instrument. It's both poetic and, honestly, kind of adorable. Next, a potter invites you to her workspace. She's shaping one of those porous clay jars you saw earlier. Her hands move automatically, centuries of technique flowing through every motion. You ask how she knows it'll hold water and still breathe. She shrugs. You learn, you listen to the clay. Everything here is light, the tactile, tuned in, full of feedback loops between the builder and the earth. And you suddenly realize something important. Ancient Persian cooling wasn't just about structures. It was about craft. It was about learning from failure, adjusting to the land, and working with materials you could touch, smell, even taste though. To be fair, you don't recommend tasting the mud brick. One of the apprentices mentions how certain cooling elements became culturally symbolic. Even spiritual wind catchers appeared on coins. Pottery, poetry, they weren't just practicality or proud. People would point to them and say, "See that? We figured out how to catch the wind." You stand in the middle of the site, sun climbing higher, and realize just how alive this knowledge still is. It isn't buried in museums or lost in scrolls. It's here, breathing, practiced, loved, as the builders return to work, mud on their hands and laughter in the air. You take one last look at the rising tower. Not much to see yet, just a few stories of brick and hope. But one day soon, it'll be a living structure, a breeze taming, house cooling, story holding miracle of ancient engineering. And someone will lie under it, years from now, and whisper the same thing you're thinking. How did they even come up with this? You think by now you've seen every trick the ancient Persians had up their flowing sleeves, but then someone hands you a bowl of soup called soup and says, "We chilled this underground. Want to see where?" Obviously, you say yes. This time, you're led through another neighborhood, one less showy, more lived in. Kids run by with sticks, and the scent of grilled eggplant floats through the air. Your guide stops beside what looks like a small domed hut, half buried in the ground. There's a narrow staircase spiraling down, and even before you take the first step, you feel it cool, quiet breath from below. This, he says, is a sardab, a cold room. You descend slowly, the light fades, the air thickens, and soon you're in a space that feels more like a wine cellar than an ancient home. The floor is packed earth, the walls are lined with stone and brick, and at the far end, shelves are stacked with clay jars, bundles of herbs, and yes, a pot with that very soup. Still cool to the touch. It's not magic, it's insulation. And, of course, hot cooled air drifting gently through. You sit on a stool, bowl in hand, and take a sip. It's minty, garlicky, and somehow refreshing. Your host chuckles. This is Avi Duke here. He says, yogurt, cucumber, herbs, some are in a bowl. And here's the wild part. The cold isn't just a bonus, it's the point. In ancient Persia, many dishes were designed to work with the climate. Cooling foods, hydrating herbs, and ingredients that kept well underground. The architecture wasn't just for sleeping or lounging. It was for eating, for living. You ask how they kept meat or dairy from spoiling, and your guide leads you to the back of the room. Here, the walls are double layered, packed with insulating materials like straw and ash. Some spots even have built-in water channels. Beneath the floor, an early version of radiant cooling. And again, historians argue over the details. Some believe sardabs were only for the elite. Others say they were standard in most homes with access to connaughts. But the archaeological evidence is clear. These subterranean chill zones weren't rare. They were essential. You step back outside, blinking at the light, and realize something odd. The deeper you go into Persian cooling technology, the more personal it gets. It's not just about domes and towers. It's not just cities and palaces. It's soup, it's yogurt, it's where the pickles go. This was cooling as a way of life, woven into the most everyday things. Later, your guide walks you through a small bazaar, where vendors still keep certain items under clay covers, shaded from the sun. Dried herbs, rose petals, saffron, dates, everything seems carefully arranged, as if centuries of trial and error went into deciding what sits where. You stop at one stall and point to a strange-looking jar buried halfway into a stone slab. Cheese, the vendor says proudly. Still cool. Want to try? You do. It's tangy, crumbly, and absurdly good. You lean against a wall, cheese in hand, and realized just how intimate ancient engineering can be. It wasn't just built for grand solutions, it was built for small joys, for quiet meals, chilled drinks, and one delicious moment of relief in the middle of a desert afternoon. And really, when you think about it, what's the point of cooling down a palace if you can't enjoy some cold soup in the process? At this point, you've come to expect cool air from unlikely places: underground chambers, clay jars, even rooftops under the stars. But this time, your guide takes you somewhere different, somewhere less physical, but just as powerful. Want to know the real secret to surviving the Persian heat? He asks, grinning. You shrug. Let me guess, another type of mud brick. He chuckles. No, routine. You blink. Wait, like schedules. Yes, he says, already walking. Time is architecture too. You follow him to a small, sunlit square. Around you, shops are shuttered. A few stray cats stretch in the shade. The air is still and drowsy. It's noon, but it feels like someone pressed pause on the city. And that's exactly the point. In ancient Persia, life wasn't just designed around buildings, it was designed around temperature rhythms. Morning was for work, midday for stillness, late afternoon for movement again. Nights, that's when things really came alive. They called it siesta elsewhere. Here, it was simply understood. You lived by the heat's moods, and the heat, in return, spared you. Your guide gestures to the empty street. See, no one's fighting the sun. They're napping, cooking, writing letters, telling stories in courtyards. You wander into one of those courtyards, a quiet oasis, shaded by grapevines and the soft whisper of hanging cloth. An older man sits cross-legged, fanning himself with a palm leaf and sipping cold tea. We don't chase the heat, he says. We wait for it to leave. It sounds poetic, but it's also strategic. In a time before electric fans and industrial coolants, timing was everything. Markets opened early and closed before the sun peaked. Weddings took place after dark. Even religious observances were timed for the cooler hours. Time management wasn't just cultural, it was thermodynamic. You ask about sleep patterns, and your guide nods. 2 sleeps, sometimes 3. He explains, 1 at night, 1 in the day, and maybe 1 in the evening if dinner runs late. Even education adapted. In some cities, schools held classes before dawn. By the time the sun hit its stride, kids were home, resting or helping with indoor chores. The rhythm of the day wasn't about squeezing in more hours. It was about using the hours the land gave you. And it wasn't all rigid. There were celebrations, music, festivals, but even those worked with the environment. Night markets lit by oil lamps, rooftop poetry recitals with windcatchers humming in the background, communal storytelling where the only cool was the air drifting in from the courtyard pool. Historians still debate whether this flexible lifestyle was necessity or brilliance, but most agree it worked, and it left room for something we don't often associate with desert life: joy. You spend the afternoon like they do, lounging, snacking on almonds and dates, letting your body align with the pace of the place. For once, your phone is forgotten, your inbox ignored. You're not being lazy, you're sensing with a 2,000-year-old strategy that says, you are not a machine, and neither is the sun. As twilight falls, the city stirs again. Shopkeepers open their shutters. Children chase each other through alleys. The scent of roasted lamb wafts from somewhere nearby. The desert, once oppressive, now feels like a giant exhale. And as you walk through the softening air, you think maybe the ancient Persians didn't just master cooling systems. Maybe they mastered patience. By now, you're deep in the rhythm of it all, walking slower, breathing with the breeze, even sipping tea like it's a time-sensitive ritual because, frankly, it is. But today, your guide has something a little more cerebral in mind. He leads you into a dim room lined with books, some handwritten, others printed on paper so fragile, it looks like a breeze could take it away. This is no ordinary library, it's a climate archive. This, he says, tapping a worn scroll, is how we remembered the wind. You look around, puzzled. The walls are stacked with blueprints, diagrams of wind catchers, notes on seasonal wind directions, dates, names, repairs. Some of these records are centuries old. One in particular catches your eye. It's a scribbled chart showing which way to orient a house. in order to catch the cool north wind during the hottest month of the Persian calendar. They didn't just build with the wind, they tracked it, named it, argued about it in public forums, and wrote it all down. You know how we name storms today. Your guide says they named breezes, gave them personalities. Some were gentle, some were stubborn, some only showed up when pomegranates ripened. You laugh, but you're also kind of in awe. This wasn't guesswork. It was climate pattern recognition centuries before modern meteorology, and it fed directly into everything design. Planting cycles, even when to move your bed up to the roof for sleeping. One scroll includes a surprisingly poetic passage. When the west wind returns, sweep the courtyard, for the dust will dance. Honestly, you'd buy that as a fridge magnet. A scholar joins you, his fingers stained with ink and saffron tea. He tells you about the architects of old people who weren't just the engineers, but naturalists, poets, and mathematicians all rolled into one. To design a good wind catcher, he says, you had to understand geometry, the weight of the air, the gossip of the sky. You raise an eyebrow. Gossip. He grins. The air tells you things if you listen. This wasn't just practical, it was cultural. Annual festivals celebrated the arrival of favorable winds. Children were taught the directions like they were compass-based fairy tales. North is the lion's breath, east is the sparrow's sigh. Even personal calendars were built around wind cycles. Brides were advised to plan weddings when the southern breeze was cool. Farmers delayed harvests if the winds were moody. And yes, there were entire debates, often written in the margins of scrolls, over whether a particular wind deserved its own tower design. And today, much of that knowledge still lingers hidden in idioms, customs, and the subconscious memory of cities, designed to lean into the wind rather than block it. You look around this dusty little room and realize, while the structures were made of mud and brick, the real foundation of Persian cooling was information, observed, remembered, passed on like stories. You step outside into the street, a breeze catches your sleeve. You glance north, instinctively now, and think, chill wind, slightly late this year. You smile. You're not just learning ancient engineering anymore. You're becoming part of its folklore. You wake up the next morning to a new sound. Not wind, not bird song, not even a distant goat bleating for breakfast. It's hammers, soft, rhythmic, deliberate. You follow the sound through the narrow alleys and arrive at a work site, but this time, it's not a construction crew. It's artisans working on something you didn't expect to be so elegant. Tiles, glazed, painted, patterned tiles, hundreds of them. Your guide catches up to you and smiles. You've seen how we cooled the air. Now see how we cooled the space. You frown, confused. Tiles for cooling. In us, beauty is functional. You step closer. The artisans are setting intricate blue and white tiles into the floor of a courtyard. You crouch down to touch one ice smooth, cool, and just slightly moist from morning condensation. Even in the sun, it stays temperate. Turns out, glazed tiles weren't just decorative. They reflected sunlight, resisted heat absorption, and helped keep surfaces cooler to the touch. And when paired with shaded courtyards, trickling fountains, and gentle breezes, they turned the very ground into a kind of passive air conditioner. One artist, his fingers stained with cobalt, tells you how certain color glazes were chosen not just for aesthetics, but for their thermal properties. Blue for reflection, white for light, green for the soul. You glance around at the nearly finished courtyard. It's like standing inside a giant piece of living artwork that also happens to have a perfect indoor climate. And it wasn't just floors. You're led into a domed chamber, where the lower half of the walls is covered in geometric tiles. They shimmer softly in the filtered light. And again, they're cool to the touch. Not cold, just crisp, comfortable. These help regulate temperature. Your guide explains the tiles absorb cool from the air at night, held it into the morning. During the day, they reflected heat away from human height. You ask if it made a measurable difference. He shrugs. Depends on the size of the space. But after a long walk in 43-degree heat, yes, it feels like heaven. Historians still debate whether the use of tile in Persian architecture was originally driven by climate or just aesthetics. The answer, like most things in this culture, It's probably both. Why not make your cooling system beautiful? Why not inscribe poetry into your thermal buffer? And speaking of poetry, someone hands you a scrap of verse painted into the edge of a fountain. When the sun grows cruel, let the stone be kind. Yeah, you're definitely putting that on a t-shirt. The more you walk through the space, the more you notice the intentional layering tile, shade, airflow, water. Every surface, every texture is part of the equation. Even the ceilings play their role. Some are painted with dark pigments to absorb heat during the short, chilly winters. Others are stark white to bounce light and heat back up during summer. And let's not forget the acoustics. These domes don't just cool the body, they soothe the mind. Every drip of water, every step across a tiled floor, every rustle of breeze echoes with just enough reverb to feel like a lullaby. You lean against a tiled column, exhale deeply, and realize comfort isn't always about temperature. Sometimes it's about being surrounded by materials that were chosen with care, that want you to relax, that invite you to pause, and in that moment, just for a second, you're not a tourist anymore. You're part of the design. You step back outside, blinking as the bright sun warms your skin, but your mind is still swirling with ideas: mud bricks, wind catchers, underground ice pits, and now shimmering tiles that cool by day and cradle warmth by night. It's a dizzying web of ingenuity, and yet somehow it feels like the most natural thing in the world. Your guy smiles knowingly. You see, cooling was never just one invention, it was a system. You not realizing that all these pieces, the connets channeling water, the yachtals storing ice, the wind towers catching breezes, the tiles reflecting light, weren't isolated marvels. They were parts of a living, breathing ecosystem designed to make life in the Persian heat not just bearable, but pleasant. You start to see the city as a giant, ancient machine, not a cold, metallic one, but one made of earth and water and air. Each neighborhood a cog, each courtyard a valve, each rooftop a fan. Your guide points to a nearby garden, bursting with pomegranate trees and fragrant herbs. Even plants helped. Trees gave shade, flowers cooled the air with their scent. Every element played a role. You inhale deeply, the scent of jasmine and mint fills your lungs, and for a moment, you feel transported back in time. He adds, we still use these ideas today. Modern architects borrow from the past: passive cooling, natural ventilation. All the old was then repurposed for new challenges. You smile at the thought. 2 millennia later, these ancient Persians are still teaching us how to live gently with nature, how to find comfort without machines humming, how to build with patience and respect. And as the sun begins to set, casting long shadows over the city's mud brick walls, you think, maybe the real genius wasn't just the technology. Maybe it was the mindset, the idea that humans and environment could coexist in harmony, that comfort didn't have to come at the planet's expense. You watch the breeze ripple through the date palms, carrying the soft evening chill, and you feel a quiet gratitude for the people who, thousands of years ago, looked at the blazing sun and thought, how do we stay cool together? The final morning here greets you with a soft, rosy light. You feel more than a visitor. Now you're a quiet witness to an ancient dance between people and climate, a story whispered through generations. Before you leave, your guide takes you to one last place, the ruins of an old city gate, where the breeze seems to linger longer than anywhere else. He turns to you, voice gentle. Cooling was survival, yes, but it was also comfort, community, culture. You nod slowly, realizing that every cool courtyard, every shaded alley, every glimmering tile, every gust of wind was a thread in a much larger tapestry. As you stand there, the sun climbing higher, you think about the lessons tucked into these stones. The ancient Persians didn't just invent air conditioning, they invented living with heat with elegance, creativity, and kindness. It's a legacy that humbles you and somehow comforts you too. You take a deep breath, savoring the coolness that still lingers in the shade, the sound of distant water, the faint scent of rose petals on the wind. And in that moment, you know you carry a piece of this place with you no matter where you go, no matter how far into the future. Because the story of cooling isn't just about escaping heat, it's about embracing it thoughtfully. And with that, You close your eyes, the warm desert sun on your face, the memory of ancient breezes rocking you gently toward rest. Now, slow your breath. Let your mind drift like the soft desert winds. Feel the gentle hum of ancient air brushing past you, carrying stories and dreams across time. You are safe, you are cool, you are home, even if just for tonight. Good night, and sleep well.